Hi, I'm Dr. Gwen, and I'm a clinical psychologist who's been empowering neurodiverse and disabled individuals, their families, and their support systems for over 20 years. I love collecting and curating useful tools, reframing mindsets, and promoting positive actions that I've professionally found to benefit this awesome community. If this is something you're interested in, please consider subscribing to my channel. In this episode, I interview Debbie Reber, founder of TiLT Parenting, a robust online resource that supports parents in raising differently wired or neurodiverse children. We get into Debbie's mission to shift the current paradigm from fixing to embracing, from deficits to strengths, and from isolation to connection. She shares why she started TiLT Parenting and who can benefit. If you're interested in finding and belonging to an awesome community that celebrates neurodivergence, keep listening to discover if TiLT Parenting is for you. Welcome to the show. I am so excited to welcome Debbie Reber, founder of TiLT Parenting. Hi, Debbie. How are you?
Hi, Gwen. I'm great. I'm happy to be having this conversation.
Well, I am really honored that you have agreed to come on to my show. I was telling you off air that I was falling deeper and deeper in love with your philosophy, your website, your mission, your vision of what you're trying to do. So I'm just really grateful that you're here. Before we get into that, I'm wondering if you could help us get to know you better.
Sure. Yes, and I could tell so many different versions of my story, but I will just say that I am the mom of a 17-year-old neurodivergent kiddo. I started TiLT parenting really because it was what I needed at the time when my child was younger, and I was having a hard time figuring out how to forge a path. This was not my career goal when I was younger. So before I did this, I spent many years writing books actually for teen girls, self help books for girls. And before that, I worked in kids television for a number of years. So I've got a lot of different careers and pieces to my life. But I always like doing things that are creative, purpose driven, trying to help other people live better lives.
Yeah, which led you to TiLT Parenting in for personal and like it's almost like you're professional. You were like prepared
Yeah.
professionally in many ways to communicate your journey and
Yes.
story and create a place. Which it's so I always find it to be so interesting because parents create the best stuff.
Yeah.
Like you
It's
just,
true.
I mean, I think about some of the groups that are in my community, some of the organizations in my community, some of the services in my community, and they were created by parents that needed to do it because one, it might have not existed. And they needed to fill that space with something very specific, which ended up and ends up resonating with others. So
Yeah.
thank goodness for you. Okay, so it leads you to TiLT Parenting. Tell us about TiLT Parenting.
Yeah. So Till parenting was born many years before I actually brought it to fruition because, as I was raising this little kiddo who was not thriving, was struggling in school, and we were kind of figuring out what's really going on. And I was so challenged to find positive, strengths based resources. Every website I went to made me feel like, you know, I I drew this short straw. I found myself this a member of a community that I did not want to be in because it didn't feel great. And so I kind of always knew I have to make this club a lot cooler because there's a lot of us who are in this club, and it's not okay that we feel like, we're these marginalized groups, and that that we have this kind of less than optimal experience as parents. And so I wasn't ready to do it at the time, but I started in my mind thinking it's going to look really cool. It's got to be inviting. It's got to have a hip vibe. It has to, that was happening for many years. And, flash forward to I think maybe 5 or 6 years after that is when I started to research what would I create if I could support parents? How could I help parents feel seen, realize that they're not alone, and have access to really useful content so they could have practical tools? And so I launched TiLT 6 years ago now to be that resource. And I launched it as a podcast primarily, which, you mentioned all my worlds colliding. I worked in production. I used to work at the radio station at university editing audio. So it really, everything came full circle. And so, yeah, I created it with this podcast and the manifesto, which you mentioned. I launched it and kind of put it out there, and it has just really resonated. So it's grown to be a community, just a place for parents to, again, feel seen, realize that there's nothing wrong with their
Mhm.
kids, and there's actually so much possibility and wonderfulness in raising a child who is differently wired in some way.
Yeah, and it's so true, because your experience that you shared about what kind of resources were out there at the time, when you were looking, um, the view of it, the way that I think sometimes the framework, when individuals come or organizations come from the biomedical model, right? And we see that as something's wrong, we need to
Mm-hmm.
fix that.
Yeah.
That inevitably, I mean, I think puts the mindset and the recommendations or the resources in fixing versus empowerment and acceptance.
Yeah.
Um, you know, as I work with adults in my professional career, they often talk about their experience of receiving therapies, receiving support, and that there was, even though they might not be speakers, they might be non-speakers, but they type, right? They'll say, you know, people didn't even think that I was here or in existence. I knew that. I felt that. And it really was based on these very positive, empowering relationships that saw them, where things started to really take off for them, right? Where they
Yeah.
trusted in a relationship in order to use a device to speak, right? Whatever. I mean, but I mean, there's so many, there's countless stories that I hear from my clients about needing to be seen, needing to be accepted, needing a place of belonging. And that
Mhm.
extends to their families as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think as so many parents discover what's happening with their child, kind of the default mode is panic. It is that fix it mode, that because we often don't see any other way. Like what's been modeled in the media or among friends, is that, okay, this is a problem. This is what you need to do. Early intervention, therapies, fix, we just kind of, and so parents often kind of jump on that bandwagon before they've even taken a pause and realize, oh, this is the same kid that I had yesterday. What do I know to be true about this child, as opposed to just feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm behind and I have to get caught up. And so it really does. And that's part of the work that I do in TiLT, is really helping parents take that pause and start to reframe their relationship with their child
Mm.
and look at them through a different lens.
As you think about your club and your club members,
Mhm.
um, what is it? What is a good fit? If you say, if you're a parent that is X, TiLT Parenting, the community at TiLT Parenting, will be a lovely place for you, and that's where the
Mhm.
magic will happen. That's where the magic
Yeah.
sauce is, right? How would you
Yeah. Yeah.
describe that parent?
I've never been asked that question before. I mean, I designed TILT to be inclusive of all parents who are raising a neurodivergent kid. And I use the term differently wired, but so it could be autism, ADHD, twice exceptional, gifted, learning disabilities. So I wanted it to be a really big umbrella to support parents whose kids were not thriving in some way because they're
Mhm.
butting up against the norms that and the expectations that we have in schools and in society. So so it's in that way, it's really for any parent in that situation, the people who respond to what I'm creating and who find that it really supports them and their families are parents who who don't believe that their child is broken, or there's something about, the labels or the protocol that's been presented to them that doesn't really sit well with them, and they want to dig deeper. They want to do the work on themselves to better understand their part in this relationship, and question, the one of the in my book Differently Wired, the first chapter is about question everything you thought you knew about parenting. And I think so parents who have that curiosity mindset, who are open-minded and want to really kind of understand who their kids are in a deep level and do the work to help the whole family thrive in that way, those are the people who tend to really appreciate the resources that I share.
Yeah, that's really lovely. And I love that you're really, there's a focus on useful content, um, because there's so much content out there,
Yeah.
actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard. It's hard to make decisions about where to focus. And so being able to be in a community that you trust, to be able to explore ideas, explore different mindsets. Really, you in your book really and your website really talk about encouraging a paradigm shift.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you could kind of define for the audience, just in case they don't know what a paradigm shift is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll just to go back, before I launched TiLT, I spent about a year really researching what I wanted to create, but also what the status quo was. Like, I researched talking to hundreds of parents and reading lots of books, but just trying to understand what are the aspects of our systems that are keeping us stuck, right? That are keeping our kids in educational systems that don't really support them in the way that allows them to learn the way that they learn. What are the problems with our insurance models? What are, so I kind of really looked at all the different pieces of where we are now that is resulting in us kind of being in this place where neurodivergent kids are not fully being seen as for all the potential that they have. And then I also thought about, and what's the cost of that? What's at stake if we don't start making some changes? And so I started thinking about this bigger paradigm, and the paradigm is really the status quo. It's this, and I define it in my manifesto as, I won't get all of it right, but just this kind of guilt or fear-based parenting model, this, fitting in at all costs, you know, this kind of pursuit for these arbitrary timelines and milestones that don't really look at who the child is. Like, there's so many pieces to it. It's kind of like the big system that we're all swirling around in as parents. And so the shift is how do we kind of just shake that up in such a way that there's room for our kids to be who they are, that there's room to go your own path and not feel like you're failing as a parent, or that you've just blown your kid's future because you chose a different direction. So I see it as just being questioning everything, workplaces, making room for neurodivergent employees and changing the culture of how interviews are conducted, or, all the pieces. There's so many aspects of society and the systems that we have to engage with that just, they're a mismatch for more than 20% of the population, if you think about how many neurodivergent people there are out there.
Yeah, it is. I've heard this referred to as like, the master's tools. When you've got to use the master's tools, for example, in insurance or in education, where you have to identify the disability in order to get a service, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is our traditional kind of service delivery model. You're already put into a pretty disempowered place. And
Mm-hmm.
so to be able to shift it to the ideas of the neurominority, what does that mean? Um, do you have to fit in? Who's defining socially appropriate? Love that idea of, how interviews are very, very discriminatory, actually,
Mm-hmm.
in our
Mm-hmm.
community, right? And challenging that. And I think that there's a growing movement, like the neurodiversity movement is really growing,
Mm-hmm.
to provide words, phrases, education, to help us understand this. So
Yeah.
that's so fantastic. And it's no small feat. Changing
Yeah.
paradigms is no small feat, and I love your approach because it's so positive, which is like one thing at a time, one person at a time, one move at a time, so kind of the culmination of those small actions, speaking up, standing up, will make a difference and does make a
Yeah.
difference. And so not to have that be discouraging, which it can be, especially when you don't
Mm-hmm.
have a support system or a community in order to do this with, and surround yourself
Yeah.
with. The other part of your manifesto that really resonated with me and the work that I do is connection. Stay
Mm-hmm.
connected. Try not to withdraw. And I'm
Yeah.
like wondering if you could say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think for so many parents whose journey does look different than maybe their neighbors or their in-laws or, just other parents at their kids' schools, it can be very isolating because, especially when we're, depending on how the child's neurodivergence manifests or what's going on. Some parents are discovering and more slowly than others that there's something going on, and that can be really confusing because you get mixed messages and people trying to normalize, oh well, all kids do this, I wouldn't worry about it, and inside you're like, oh my gosh, but then why is this so hard? And so there is that kind of rubber meets the road moment, I think, for a lot of parents too. And and so we tend to isolate. We often will make it our own failing, and feeling misunderstood, feeling like people don't really see or respect our kids is heartbreaking. There's a lot of breakups, I think, that happen in friendships because when we don't feel seen, uh, or we feel like our kids aren't being seen, that feels even worse. And so I think finding people who really get it, who can just be a listening ear, who have that hard-won wisdom, maybe being a little bit further down the road, to just see your experience in someone else's journey. Like the first chapter of my book, I share our whole kind of story of discovering my child's neurodivergence and some ugly school breakups and all of that. I get emails still weekly from parents saying, I could have written that chapter. I didn't know anyone else had gone through that level of pain in this kind of a situation. So there's something so powerful, I think, in finding other people who can really relate, because then we realize, oh, it's not just me. My kid isn't an outlier. There's nothing wrong here. And then we can start to make that shift into more positivity and strength based, and just optimism about what can happen for our kids.
Yes. 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 And there's something really powerful, I think, about feeling a sense of belonging and connection.
Mm-hmm.
That in and of itself is powerful, not only for
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergent individuals, right, but their families as well.
Yeah.
And so that's
Mm-hmm.
lovely. That's lovely. So Debbie, if someone were to join the TiLT parenting community,
Mm-hmm.
what can they expect?
Well, there's more content on there than I almost know what to do with. So I'll just say, first of all, I am working on streamlining it so that it doesn't feel overwhelming when you show up there. But I will say, what you can expect is, all the material on there to feel, again, strengths based, to be not about fixing, but about really deeper understanding who our kids are and really doing our own deep work. And so, the podcast, which I've done close to 300 episodes now, and I really try to bring on a variety of guests who have a variety of lenses. I really carefully curate my list. So there's a ton of neurodivergent voices, different genders, different ethnicities, just like a real, I want everyone to feel seen in my guests. And um, no woo woo stuff. It's very like evidence based, very strengths based approach. And so I want parents to feel like they can listen to an episode and leave with something really practical, some
Mm.
reframe that can change their life in that moment. And that's kind of my biggest goal. And I'll just say kind of overall, like with the book too, and you can download the first chapter on the website for free. But the book also, it's not about here's 10 things to do for your kid, or here's this strategy that's going to help with this meltdown. All of my work is about encouraging parents to look deeper at themselves, you know, their own personal triggers. What is your coping strategy when this happens? What are you making this behavior mean? How can you better show up for your kid? How can you better be fluent in their unique language? And so it really is, it's about us and how we can just better be the humans that our kids need, so that they can feel resourceful and creative and whole in who they are.
Mm. Wow. This podcast is not long enough for where I want to go with just that, Debbie. That will be maybe another time. And I love this beautiful support and awareness of how we as parents really truly are the biggest influencers
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in our kids' lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that development is an interactive process. And for me, I have lenses on, adulthood, preparation for adulthood, launching. What does that mean? And when we're trying to promote agency and autonomy and confidence and a positive self-concept, it's so important to understand the relationship between a parent and their teen or young adult.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Mm-hmm.
love that you have a community that does this, and you do this all the, you start, I'm thinking that your community has a bunch of different ages, right? It's not just a
Yeah.
certain age, it's all ages of kiddos.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are new people who find TiLT every day because, they'll get this information about their
Yeah.
4 or 5 year old, and someone will say, oh, you need to read this book, or you need to go to TiLT Parenting. So there are a lot of people who are new to this journey, or just trying to figure it out. And yeah, there are plenty of folks who have older kids, some parents of adults for sure, and a number of people who've been with me since the very beginning. And that's been really fun, to get to see how their journey has unfolded. And I will just say, selfishly, I learned from everybody as well. I have not got this all figured out myself. When I interview people, I ask the questions I need answers to too. I
Sure.
try to channel my listener, but I benefit greatly from this community, and I'm super grateful for it.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, Debbie. So, um, what is one thing that you wish everyone understood? Kind of picking up from that paradigm shift, but what is one thing? If you could only choose one thing that you wish
And
everyone understood.
I think it goes back to that idea of that our kids are not broken. And I think it's really, again, that message isn't modeled for us because we do live in a society where there's so much stigma associated with labels. We, as a society, especially in the US, are about fixing things, right? And there's just not a lot of room to think otherwise. And so, and the minute we start thinking our kids are broken, we're going down a path that's going to hurt for everybody. It's about lack. It's about deficit. And so, and I did it too, and so I think part of what I'm trying to do is save parents a few years of that fix it mode, and more quickly lean into really seeing who our kids are and start to think about what are actually the strengths and how can we leverage those strengths to support this human in living the most fulfilled life they can.
Mm, amen. Amen. All right. If someone's listening to this and they're like, I want to know about tilt parenting. What's the best way for them to find you?
Well, tiltparenting.com is the home. And again, don't get overwhelmed if you go to the home page. If you're like, oh my gosh, there's too many things to choose from, start with, the manifesto or start with the
Mm,
podcast. And then I'm on social media at Tilt Parenting as well, mostly Facebook, some Instagram, and Twitter, not so much, but I pop up there on occasion. So I'd start with the website.
yeah, it's awesome. And the manifesto is a must download. I will say, it's when I started to fall in love. Anyway, Debbie, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your time and everything you're doing for the community.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to have you on my show too.
I can't wait either.